Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the Kiwi Ears Crinacle collaboration known as Singolo. So here it is up close, and we'll take a closer look at this in a second, but there is the KARS tube. I'm not going to talk too much about KARS, as Crinacle put his own video out about it, and he is probably more knowledgeable about it than I am, so I will sort of refer you to that if you're really curious about what the tube does. But yeah, very nice looking shell, and again, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a second. This is the cable, and we'll talk about more in a second as well. This is the Kiwi Ears Allegro. This is their USB dongle that came out a little while ago. It's actually pretty good. I'm not going to do a whole video on it, but as far as a ESS dongle that has sort of a complementary sound signature to Singolo, I think this one hit it. So Singolo is maybe more of a mid sub-bass style set sound. This is an ESS DAC chip, so it's kind of almost the opposite of it. So it's a little bit lighter on bass, more on the upper range, nice extension. So I think it actually paired pretty well with Singolo. And but as I said, I'm not going to spend do a whole review on it, but it's actually pretty nice. And this is a IVIPQ custom cable in the same style as Singolo's cable, but in the 4.4. So I guess my only nitpick on this guy was the button. So you can't actually hold the button down, and it doesn't ramp the volume up or down. You have to keep on pressing it. I thought that was sort of annoying. That would be my only nitpick there. But yeah, decent dongle. Kind of nice that Kiwi Ears is branching out there. So let's kind of get back into it, and we will jump into it kind of right at the beginning. So what is it? It is a one dynamic driver. That dynamic driver happens to be an 11mm LCP diaphragm with a resonator, the KARS thing, with a mid-bass tuck for cleaner bass and mids. What is it really? I would say generally it is a generally appealing 11mm dynamic driver with a very familiar tuning. Those of you who are familiar with Crinacle's other sets and maybe Zero Red, you sort of are somewhat familiar with this style tuning, very familiar bass shelf. This is the KARS tuck at about 300 hertz. And Red didn't really have that much of a tuck, but very similar. I mean, that was the gist of KARS, was to approximate tuning two different drivers with a single driver. So that's how he got that tuck there with the KARS resonator. And then the rest of it is actually not all that far different. I think I had a lot of the same comments about Red as I do here. It's a really nice bass shelf, really nice mids, and then a conservative treble, and that's not all that far from describing Singolo. So I would call it familiar. I think it's very general appealing, and I think those of you who are familiar with his tunings, you sort of got that general feel for about what it's going to sound like. So let's kind of get into the hard to win argument. So I think some of the early impressions were based on a couple different things, and one I think was the price. I think the $79 cost, it really puts it into a price range where you have to stand out against your competition. There's lots and lots of single dynamic drivers that do really, really nice sound quality and do certain things really, really well. I think EA500LM is one. And to jump right into that cost was sort of a difficult thing to do. And it's not really, I think Crinacle called this a proof of concept, and the price range puts it into more of a you need to stand out versus give this a try because this is a new style tuning and something new and it's really cool to try. I think that the price kind of put it in a difficult position of trying to balance these two things. So, and second, I do think the fit is harder than most early impressions let on. And we'll talk about the fit here, and we'll kind of move this over here a little bit. So first of all, I think some people were really ripping on the cable and thought it was a super cheap cable, and he's ripping us off at every way possible, including the cable. And I don't think that was actually the case. I think the cable was very intentional, a very thin, lightweight cable to not tug on the shells. Why is that? Because the shells have a shallow fit, and it's kind of hard to look at it just staring at the shell, but I will say it is a shallow fit. And typically what you would have here is either more extension here or a dip over here that would get you, a millimeter or two more inside of your ear. This one is actually really shallow fit, and you can kind of see they couldn't really dip it enough because the edge of the dynamic driver is right there. So you end up with almost a flat back here and then not much extension here. And that just becomes a shallow fit. And so having a lightweight cable, I think, was the right move. And I wouldn't, if you're just kind of starting out and grabbing this, I wouldn't throw on a heavyweight cable because it's going to tug on the shell and that's going to cause other problems. So second, the nozzle is actually a little bit wider. So you have a shallow fit and then, you know, almost a wider nozzle. And if we look at this guy, let's see if I could actually get this lined up. And maybe. So it's about 6.38, it's about 6.3 millimeters wide at the edge there. And that's actually, you know, a little bit wide for what most people are used to. And it's when you hit the 6 millimeter mark and go over the 6 millimeter mark, it tends to be noticeably wide. So you throw all these things in combination. You've got a cable that's lightweight, so it doesn't tug on the shell. The shell is actually a little bit shallow fit, and then you have a wider nozzle, which prevents you from getting a deeper fit. So those three things sort of in combination end up with a really harder to fit style shell that, and I think most people were trying to get it to fit and said, well, I'm getting a seal because I have some bass. And that's not how this one works. This one works differently because you have enough bass. Even if the fit isn't quite right, there's plenty of bass here. You're still going to hear bass. All that bass isn't going to leak out with a fit that's not quite sealed. What you're going to notice is the shouter bit. So as I said, this shell, this is a little bit wider, so you really have to get this one deeper in there so you don't get that shout effect. You get sort of a resonation point that hits right here in the shouty area. So if you don't have it deep enough, this becomes really shouty. So you can have bass and you can still have shout, and that's not how this is supposed to sound. It should actually sound the way it graphs. It should be a nice bassy set with a nice relaxed upper mid here. And if you're hearing shout, that just means that this part is not deep enough into your ear, and then maybe it's a little bit too wide for you. Maybe you just have to push it in a little bit. But the point at which you are hearing shout and bass at the same time, you're probably not getting the fit right. So yes, I found this whole thing a little bit more complicated, and you have to understand what you're hearing to understand what to do to address it. So as I said, don't really mess with the cable. Take the cable as it is. I happen to have a custom cable that's very similar to the stock cable, so I was able to listen to it on 4.4, but don't tug on the shell because the shell has a shallow fit, and the nozzle is a bit wider, so that's going to prevent you from getting a deeper fit. So think about all those three things if you are hearing shout and how to get it a little bit deeper into your ear, and that will make it, if you get all those things lined up, it'll actually sound much better than a lot of the first impressions. So versus EA500LM, I think EA500LM is a technically better set. Those of you who are looking for details and resolution and micro details and all those things, I think it's technically a better set, but less generally appealing because of the brightness to it. So I think the majority of people want something that, you know, sounds very familiar. Like I said, this one sounds very familiar, sounds good, doesn't cause fatigue, and that's sort of where Singolo fits in its place, as opposed to 500LM, which is probably more of a critical listening set because of the amount of detail and resolution. Its ability to resolve is actually way up there. This isn't really a resolver. This is more of a general appealing, nice bassy, nice balance, nice mids. It actually does that quite well. So does it do the subwoofer effect? And yes, you can see it does have. So the subwoofer effect, you want two parts to that. One, you want this 300 dip, so you don't have a whole lot of carryover into your mids. And second, you want some thump here from the sub bass, and that's about an 8 decibel bass shelf out there in the sub bass region. So he's kind of got both parts working there, and I think if you listen to Filter's "Hey Man, Nice Shot," it really hits that right spot for a tactile thump, and I think he actually pulled that off pretty well. I think the 11mm dynamic driver is actually better than most people let on, and when you kind of turn up the volume, put on the right track, and where it all aligns to where this one is in the sweet spot, it actually does sound quite well. The sound, and ironically, I think the first thing that I noticed right away out of the box wasn't really the bass. And again, this KARS, the little tube thing it's not really there to really affect a huge bass shelf or a huge boom or impact or anything else. It was really a tuning method to put the dip in. So I think the marketing, when they talk about the bass and the great bass, I think that's a little bit different than what KARS is actually doing. So when you put it in your ears, I think ironically, that's the first thing I noticed was the mids. And I think it very much is a mid style set. But you really do notice the mids and the treble extension. I think those two kind of stood out to me, and not ironically, as it's because it's a mid and vocal set, not a bass heavy set like I was just talking about. But when we do take a look at the bass in particular, again, it has a mid bass tuck to it. So if you're a mid bass style person, it's not really that style. It's more of a sub bass. But I would call the sub bass somewhere between fun and too much fun. On a bassier track like Odessa's Behind the Sun, I'm kind of really into their the album that came out, their Last Goodbye. I really kind of love that. And I keep on going back and forth with it on lots and lots of sets. But a really nice sub bass style track when you hit about 109, and don't jump right to 109, let it play up to 109. And as soon as you hear it start booming and the powerful sub bass to it, I think it plays right into Singolo's 11mm sub bass. Clear mids, nice stage. I think everything just comes across really well. And again, I had better impressions of this than most people, and maybe it's because I turn it up, maybe because I have music that fits better with this style set. I don't know what it is. I thought it was a very fun set. And when you turn it up to the point where you can hear the sub bass, really shaking, those of you who are really into those long sub bass vibrations, decays, it's all there. And then on the other side, I think Peter Gabriel's Red Rain, I think it's a little bit of the opposite. I think it's a little bit too much fun. And I had the urge to EQ it, just to sub bass dip it just a little bit to clean it up, hear more of everything to match the mids. But as a sub bass heavy, turn it up fun set, I think it actually pulls that off quite well. On the mids, I think this is definitely more of a mid set than a bass set. And it's not a low volume set either. And I think Crinacle has this reputation of being a low volume listener. And I wouldn't say this is a low volume set at all. It definitely has a relaxed ear gain. And again, if you're hearing shout and you're not hearing a relaxed ear gain, there's something wrong with your fit. But that rise can really handle a wide range of volume. And this 11mm needs some more volume to really firm up and fill out the range. At a low volume, it's kind of okay, but it really comes into its own when you turn up the volume. And pay attention to a track like Madonna's Like a Prayer, and you really notice how the bass rises quicker than her voice. It's pretty noticeable how her voice stays not constant, but it's actually increasing at a very slow rate. The bass comes up, and you really start to hear the 11mm sub bass pounding in the background. You get to the point where it sounds very fun. That's about the point at which I was listening to it. So gently bring the bass up to match her voice and sound fun. That pushes the treble and the stage in place. And just pay attention to the vocals, even at 3 minutes and 50 seconds, when they project outside of your head, just as they should, like they do on other sets at this price and more. That's just one of those little bits that sounds just the way it should. And again, I don't think this set is any better or worse than other sets. I think it actually hits a lot of the qualifications at $80, and that was just kind of one of those that you sort of notice that you're like, oh, that's exactly the way it should sound on more expensive sets. But I do think most of the Immaculate Collection, most of Madonna's vocal stuff, most of pop music, this mid-centric, well, not mid-centric, but a vocal style set that has really nice mids. I think that's what Singolo does quite well. Technically, it's still a dynamic driver, so it won't have that biting edge and speed on Metallica's Orion. I had been listening to Orion a lot on Cadenza 4, and I got really used to hearing it with the balanced armature. So to hear it on a dynamic driver, I'm like, yeah, okay. And it's still a dynamic driver, and it still has limitations on speed and technical ability. And again, I would say this is more of a fun set as opposed to a set that is trying to push any technical boundaries. On the treble, and now I'll have two viewpoints on this one. I think as a general appealing, approachable set for people buying their first upgrade, perhaps you are a fan of Crinacle and you want to buy this set and listen to what he thinks is sort of neutral and a really nice sounding set. I think this one lands quite right. The extension in the lower level sounds really energetic without being over energetic. Like I said, you get actually a pretty nice extension on it without pushing it too hard. But if you're a hobbyist looking for the perfect dynamic driver, you think $80 should be a standout dynamic driver and do things that other dynamic drivers do, maybe the treble should sound like a balanced armature or even have the resolution of an EA500LM. It's really not that style of tuning and not that style of a dynamic driver. This is more of a conservative tuning, do no wrong style tuning, and it should give you treble without giving you fatigue, and that's essentially what it does. And stage, I thought it sounded big with projection right out of the box. It sounds better with some more volume, like I said. I think the imaging is okay. It's just hard to pull off with that amount of sub bass and this kind of bass curve and still have really tight imaging. But some tracks will definitely surprise you. The less sub bass you have in a track, kind of the better the imaging is, as you would expect. So that is what I got on Singolo. So again, kind of a nice set. I thought it was a fun set to listen to. So till next time, thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.